The city was quiet when the sun slipped below the metal skyline. Neon lights blinked across the streets and the air smelled of oil and dust. Inside a small repair shop on the corner of District 7, the machines had stopped humming, but one worker still remained. Lyra, the alien woman with pale silver skin and tired blue eyes, was still fixing a broken generator. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but she kept working as if every second mattered. Around her, empty cups of cold coffee sat beside metal parts and scattered tools. The shop clock showed it was long past midnight, yet she refused to leave. Mark, the human shop owner, leaned against the doorway, pretending to check his datapad. He had noticed her routine for weeks, coming before dawn, leaving after everyone else, and taking no breaks. She never talked much, just bowed slightly whenever someone thanked her. He had offered to pay her more, but she always shook her head and said, "No, I'm fine, sir." But she didn't look fine at all. That night, the hum of the city faded into silence. Mark should have gone home hours ago, but something about Lyra kept him there. He didn't understand why he cared so much. Maybe it was the way her shoulders trembled whenever someone mentioned extra hours. Maybe it was her quiet smile that looked like it was hiding pain. He finally said, trying to sound casual, "Lyra, it's late. You should rest." She didn't even look up. "Just finishing this one, sir. I'll lock up when done." Her voice was soft, respectful, but cold, like she was used to being ignored. Mark nodded and stepped outside into the cold night, pretending to leave. But curiosity bit at him. Something was wrong, and he could feel it. He walked a few steps down the street, then turned around quietly. Through the shop's dusty window, he saw Lyra pack something into a small black bag, food maybe, or small parts, and glanced nervously toward the door. She looked around like someone afraid of being watched. Then she switched off the shop lights and slipped out the back door, moving fast down the dark alley. Mark frowned. That was strange. She lived far from here in the alien housing zone, but she was heading the opposite direction. He hesitated for a moment, then whispered to himself, "All right, Lyra, let's see where you're going." He followed her silently through the narrow streets. His boots echoed softly, and he tried to keep his distance. The night was cold, and the wind carried faint sounds of distant engines. The alien woman moved with speed, but with a slight limp, clutching her bag close to her chest. As they passed the closed food stalls and empty transport hubs, Mark noticed how the guards avoided this part of town. The light posts here were broken, and stray cables sparked against the walls. Still, Lyra walked like she knew every turn, every shadow. After 10 minutes, she stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse. The sign above it was faded, letters half gone, reading Orion Storage Co. The doors were rusted shut, but Lyra didn't try to open them. Instead, she slipped through a narrow side passage, disappearing into the dark. Mark stood frozen. What was she doing here? Selling stolen parts? Meeting someone? He wanted to believe she wasn't that kind of person, but he had seen too many workers lie out of desperation. He waited for a minute, heart racing, then slowly moved toward the passage. The smell of damp metal filled the air. From inside, a faint blue light glowed. He peeked through the gap and saw her kneeling beside a crate, opening her bag. She pulled out food packets, blankets, and small metal tools. Then a sound came, a soft whimper like a child. Mark leaned closer, shocked. There was movement in the shadows, small shapes shifting. He couldn't see clearly, but something about the scene made his throat tighten. Lyra whispered something in her native language, her voice trembling with care. The faint light revealed her face, no longer tired but tender. She smiled sadly and handed out food into the darkness. The tiny shapes moved forward. Small hands, alien, fragile. Children. Mark gasped quietly and stepped back before she could see him. His mind was spinning. The alien worker who never rested, who worked until her hands bled, was hiding children in an abandoned warehouse. Why, how? He looked once more through the crack. Lyra was sitting on the ground now, feeding the little ones, wrapping a blanket around the smallest. Her expression was both broken and strong, like someone carrying the weight of two worlds. For the first time, Mark didn't see her as an employee. He saw her as a mother, or maybe a savior. Whatever truth waited there, it wasn't crime. It was something deeper, something painful. As the night deepened, Mark stepped back into the shadows. His heart beat faster, not from fear but from guilt. He had judged her without knowing her story. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would learn the truth. But tonight, he just watched, silent and unseen, as the tired alien woman became something far more human than anyone around her. Cold wind moved through the narrow alleys as Mark followed Lyra from a distance. The city at night looked different, quieter, darker, almost alive with shadows. Neon signs blinked weakly, painting the wet ground with blue and red lights. Lyra's footsteps echoed softly as she hurried forward, holding her bag close like it carried her whole life. Mark kept his distance. He didn't know why he was doing this, but his heart wouldn't let him turn back. Something about her silence in the shop, the sadness in her eyes, had planted a question in his mind that he couldn't ignore. What was she hiding? The further they went, the more deserted the streets became. The shops here were shut down long ago, windows covered with dust and metal boards. A few stray drones floated above, their red sensors glowing faintly, scanning for movement. Lyra moved like someone who knew where the blind spots were, walking fast then stopping when the drones passed. She had done this before. Mark ducked behind a broken vending machine when she suddenly turned around. His heart pounded. For a moment he thought she had seen him, but then she sighed, pulled her hood tighter and kept walking. He followed her down a narrow lane that twisted like a maze. Trash bins lined the walls and the smell of rust and damp metal filled the air. Somewhere in the distance an electric train passed, shaking the ground for a few seconds before silence returned. Finally, Lyra stopped at a dead end. The walls around her were covered in faded graffiti, symbols from different alien languages, marks of old gangs and refugee groups. She looked around, then pressed her hand against a panel hidden behind a pile of crates. A faint blue light blinked beneath her palm. The ground hummed quietly. Then with a click, a small passage opened in the wall. Mark's eyes widened. A secret door. She slipped inside quickly and the panel closed behind her, leaving nothing but an empty wall. Mark stepped out from behind the crates, staring at the spot where she had vanished. He pressed his hand against the same wall, but it was cold and solid. He whispered to himself, "What in the world are you doing, Lyra?" He searched the wall again and noticed a tiny hole like a ventilation gap, big enough to see through. When he leaned closer, he saw faint movement inside. The same blue light glowed softly. His breath caught in his throat. Through the gap, he saw Lyra walking down a narrow tunnel. The walls were made of scrap metal and wires. It looked like something built in secret, a shelter, not official, maybe even illegal. The place was quiet except for the hum of small generators. She stopped at a metal door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. Mark squinted, trying to see what was beyond. For a second, he thought he saw more figures, shadows moving, smaller ones, maybe children. Then the light flickered and went out. He stepped back quickly. His mind was racing. Was she part of a smuggling ring? Hiding refugees? Or something worse? He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was there. Still, there was something about her that didn't fit the idea of a criminal. She was too kind, too quiet, too scared of drawing attention. He looked around the alley, searching for another way inside. He found a broken staircase that led up to a small opening above the tunnel. Carefully, he climbed up, his hands cold and covered in dust. From there, he could see more clearly through the cracks in the ceiling. Inside the room, the faint blue light came from a small crystal lamp. Lyra was kneeling beside a crate, pulling out food packets from her bag. She placed them gently on the floor. Then slowly, tiny shapes began to appear from the shadows. Small alien children, weak and thin, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Mark froze. The truth hit him like a wave. These weren't criminals or smugglers. They were refugees, children who had nowhere to go. And Lyra was their protector. He watched as she handed each child food, stroked their heads and whispered soft words in her language. Her voice was full of care but also sadness. One of the children coughed weakly, and Lyra pulled him close, wrapping a torn blanket around him. Mark's throat tightened. He had followed her thinking he'd find betrayal, but instead he found sacrifice. The alien woman who never smiled, who worked until her body shook, was using her hard-earned credits to keep these children alive. He leaned back against the wall, heart heavy. Everything he thought he knew about her was wrong. Then he heard a noise, a deep metallic thud echoing from the far end of the tunnel. Lyra turned quickly, her eyes wide with fear. The children huddled closer together. Someone else was coming. Mark pressed his ear to the wall, hearing faint voices in the distance. They sounded like city guards. His heart raced. If they found this place, the children would be taken away and Lyra would be arrested. He looked down at the hidden passage again, his mind spinning with fear and confusion. He had wanted answers, but now he was part of something much bigger. And for the first time, Mark realized he wasn't just a curious shop owner anymore. He was a witness to something human, even if it came from an alien heart. Mark's breath came out in slow clouds as he crouched behind the wall. The air in the alley was cold, carrying the metallic smell of the lower city. He could still hear faint voices echoing inside the hidden tunnel, soft, worried, desperate. Lyra's voice rose above them, calm but trembling. He had no idea how long he'd been following her, but now, standing there in the dark, Mark realized he couldn't just walk away. Whatever this place was, it wasn't built for crime. It was built for survival. And Lyra, she wasn't a thief. She was something else entirely. Mark looked around, then found a loose metal plate beside the wall. He pushed it aside carefully and squeezed through the narrow gap. The passage was small and cold, lined with rough steel and pipes that dripped water. A faint blue glow came from deeper inside. Every step he took echoed softly. As he reached the end, he saw a door half open. He hesitated, then gently pushed it wider. The scene inside made him stop breathing. The room was larger than he expected, a forgotten basement, maybe an old storage area. Its walls were covered in old posters and wires. In one corner, a small generator hummed weakly. And around it, about 10 alien children huddled together, wrapped in thin blankets. Their skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, showing different colors and markings, different species, yet all frightened and hungry. Lyra knelt among them, her face tired but kind. She was giving out the food packets she had brought, dividing each one carefully so that everyone got a share. When one little boy dropped his piece, she smiled softly and handed him her own. "Eat, little one," she said in a quiet voice. "You need it more than I do." Mark's throat tightened. He stayed hidden, afraid his presence might frighten them. He watched as she repaired a broken heater, using scraps from her bag. Her hands shook, but she kept working until the machine sputtered to life, blowing weak, warm air. The children sighed in relief, curling up closer together. One small girl tugged at Lyra's sleeve. "Will they find us?" she whispered. Lyra paused. "Not if we're careful," she said softly. "I promise." Her promise sounded strong, but her eyes said otherwise. Mark leaned against the wall, struggling with his thoughts. He had followed her because he suspected something wrong. Now he felt ashamed. She wasn't hiding stolen goods. She was hiding lives. Finally, he couldn't stand there any longer. He stepped forward, his boots scraping against the floor. Lyra turned instantly, eyes wide, fear flashing across her face. She moved quickly, blocking the children with her body. "Wait, it's me," Mark said quietly, raising his hands. "It's just me, Lyra." She stared at him for a long moment, then her shoulders dropped in defeat. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If they see you, I followed you," he interrupted softly. "I wanted to know why you work so hard. Now I know." Lyra turned away, her voice breaking. "You can't tell anyone, please. They'll take the children. They'll send them to camps or worse. They have nowhere else to go." Mark took a slow step closer, his eyes on the frightened faces peeking from behind her. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since the war," she said quietly. "Their colony was destroyed. The city refused to give them shelter. I found them starving in the tunnels. So I worked. I had to. No one helps us, Mark." Her words hit him like a hammer. He looked around again. The cracked walls, the weak heater, the faces that shouldn't have to suffer. He saw the pain behind Lyra's silence at the shop, the reason she never complained. He knelt beside her. "You should have told me," he said gently. Lyra shook her head. "Humans don't trust our kind. I couldn't risk it." Mark gave a small, sad laugh. "Maybe you haven't met the right kind of human yet." For a long moment, the two just looked at each other. The distant sound of city patrols rumbled above, reminding them both that time was running out. Lyra turned back to the children, her hands trembling. "We'll move again soon," she murmured. "It's not safe here anymore," Mark nodded. "Then you won't move alone." She blinked in confusion. "You're helping me?" "I already am," he said simply. "If anyone asks, I'll say the supplies went missing. I'll bring more tomorrow. Food, blankets, whatever you need." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came out. A single tear slid down her cheek. For the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. Not the tired, polite smile she wore at work, but something real, fragile and full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one's ever helped us before." Mark looked around the shelter once more. The blue light flickered, reflecting in the eyes of the children who stared at him with quiet hope. In that moment, he understood something powerful. Kindness didn't belong to one species. Humanity wasn't about being human. It was about having a heart. He turned toward the exit, but before leaving, he glanced back and said, "Get some rest. Lyra, tomorrow will be different," she nodded, still holding the smallest child in her arms. As Mark disappeared into the shadows, the generator hummed softly, casting a faint, warm glow over the little family she had built in secret. And for the first time in many nights, Lyra allowed herself to believe in tomorrow. The next morning, sunlight crept through the dusty windows of the repair shop. The machine stood silent and the air smelled faintly of oil and metal. Mark sat at his counter, staring blankly at the same tools he used every day. But today everything felt different. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen the night before. Lyra's tired eyes, the frightened alien children, the weak hum of that old generator in the dark. The images kept flashing in his mind. He had followed her thinking she was hiding something wrong, but instead, he had found something painfully human. When Lyra walked into the shop that morning, she looked even more tired. Her hair was damp from the morning fog, and her hands trembled slightly as she set down her bag. She tried to smile at him, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Morning, sir," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. Mark wanted to act normal, to pretend nothing had happened, but the weight of the secret between them was too heavy. After a long silence, he said quietly, "We need to talk." Lyra froze, her back straightening. "About what?" He looked her in the eyes. "You know what?" She turned away instantly. "Please don't," she whispered. "You saw something you shouldn't have." Mark stepped closer, his voice low but gentle. "I saw you saving children, Lyra. I saw you keeping them alive. That's not something to hide in shame." Her eyes widened with fear. "You don't understand," she said quickly. "If the guards find out, if anyone reports us, they'll take them. They'll take me. I'll lose everything." Mark shook his head. "You never had everything, Lyra. You've been giving everything." For a moment, silence filled the shop. The only sound was the hum of an old ceiling fan. Then slowly, Lyra sank into the nearest chair, her hands covering her face. "I didn't plan this," she said, her voice breaking. "When the war came, I escaped with a transport ship. It crashed near the colony border. I found them hiding in the wreckage, children from different tribes all alone. I couldn't leave them. So I stayed." She looked up, her eyes wet. "But the city doesn't want us here. They say aliens cause trouble, take jobs, steal supplies. I knew if I told anyone, they'd send the kids to the camps. So I worked every hour I could just to feed them." Mark stood still, his heart heavy. He had heard about those camps, cold, overcrowded, where aliens were relocated and never seen again. "How do you manage all this alone?" he asked quietly. Lyra gave a faint, broken laugh. "I don't know. Some nights I think I'll collapse, but when I see their faces, I keep going." Mark looked down, his hands tightening around the counter edge. He had never met anyone like her. In a city where everyone looked out only for themselves, she had chosen to care for others, children who weren't even her kind. He took a slow breath. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," Lyra blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm helping you," he said firmly. "You can't keep feeding 10 kids on your wages. I'll bring food. I'll help fix that heater. Whatever you need." Her lips parted, stunned. "You'd risk yourself for us?" "For them," he said softly. "And for you. No one should fight alone." Tears filled her eyes. For a long time she didn't move. Then finally she whispered, "Thank you, Mark, but you must be careful. The guards have been searching the lower districts. Someone might already suspect something." Mark nodded. "Let them. They won't find anything." Just then, a loud clang came from outside, the sound of armored boots on metal ground. Lyra jumped, eyes wide. The city patrol was passing by, scanning buildings for illegal activity. Mark acted fast. He grabbed her hand and pulled her behind the counter. "Stay down," he whispered. A moment later, the guards entered the shop. Their helmets reflected the light as they swept their scanners across the room. "Routine check," one said coldly. "There's been theft reported nearby." Mark forced a calm smile. "Just me and my worker, officer. No theft here." You're welcome to check. The guard nodded, scanning the room, but his device beeped faintly near Lyra's bag. Mark's pulse spiked. Tools, he said quickly. She takes work home sometimes. The guard gave a suspicious look, then finally shrugged. Keep your doors locked. Strange things happening lately. He turned and left with his team. When the sound of boots faded away, Lyra let out a shaky breath. You didn't have to lie for me, she whispered. Mark looked at her, his voice calm. I didn't lie. You're my worker. You're family now. She stared at him, unable to speak. And for the first time in years, she felt something she thought she had lost long ago. Trust. That night, as the city lights flickered outside, Lyra carried food back to the shelter again. But this time she wasn't alone in spirit. She knew that if anything went wrong, someone, a human, would stand beside her. And in that fragile hope, something changed. Humanity had crossed species, written not in words but in actions. Night fell over the city like a heavy blanket. The streets were empty except for the distant glow of hover lights drifting between tall buildings. Mark stood by the shop window, staring out into the darkness. His reflection looked tired, eyes sunken, hands trembling slightly, but his mind was sharp, awake, filled with a decision he could no longer avoid. He had promised to help Lyra, and now that promise was everything. On the counter lay a small pile of food packets, water cans, and old blankets. He had gathered them quietly from his storage, hoping no one would notice. Each item meant fewer supplies for his business, but he didn't care. Money could be earned again. Trust couldn't. When the clock struck midnight, he packed everything into a worn satchel, locked the shop, and stepped into the cold night. The air smelled of rain and steel. He pulled his hood up and moved quickly through the alleyways, careful to avoid the street cameras. Every corner seemed to whisper danger. He reached the hidden passage he had followed Lyra through before. The metal panel looked the same, dull and uninviting. He knocked twice, then paused. After a few seconds, a familiar voice called softly from inside. Who is it? It's me, he whispered. Mark. The door slid open slightly, revealing Lyra's cautious eyes. When she saw him holding the satchel, her expression softened. You came back, she said, almost in disbelief. I said I would, he replied with a small smile. Inside, the shelter looked even smaller than before. The children were asleep in a circle, wrapped in blankets. The faint blue lamp cast soft shadows on their faces. Lyra knelt beside them, her face half in light, half in shadow. She looked exhausted, but there was something new in her eyes. Hope. Mark placed the satchel beside her. There's food, clean water, and some heating packs. It's not much, but it'll help. Lyra touched the bag with trembling fingers. Mark, you'll get in trouble if anyone finds out. He shrugged. Let them. Someone has to do the right thing. She looked at him silently for a moment, her eyes wet with emotion. Humans, she whispered. You surprise me every time. He smiled faintly. We surprise ourselves too. But deep inside, Mark knew what he was doing was dangerous. Rumors had already spread in the market about missing supplies, secret shelters, and patrols doubling their rounds. He had overheard 2 guards talking earlier that day. They were planning a sweep of the lower sector. It was only a matter of time before they found this place. He sat down beside Lyra, his voice low. We need to move them soon. The patrols are searching nearby. If they come here, Lyra nodded slowly. I know. But where can we go? The tunnels are blocked and the refugee camps are full. Every path is watched. Mark thought for a moment, then his eyes brightened. There's an old storage vault under my workshop. It hasn't been used in years. It's dry, safe, and no one checks there anymore. She stared at him, shocked. You'd hide us in your own shop? He nodded. No one will suspect it. They think I'm just another tired mechanic. Lyra hesitated, looking around at the sleeping children. That would risk everything for you. Mark shook his head. No, it might save everything for them. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then she slowly reached out and held his hand. An alien hand, cool to the touch, with faint blue veins glowing under the skin. You don't know what this means to us, she whispered. Mark looked at her, his voice soft but firm. I think I do. They sat in silence, the distant sound of the city above them like thunder. Every light flicker, every echo felt like a reminder of how fragile their safety was. Suddenly, one of the children stirred, whispering something in their sleep. Lyra gently brushed the child's hair back. They dream of home, she said quietly. But they don't remember what home looks like anymore. Mark swallowed hard. Then maybe, one day we'll give them one. That night, as dawn began to glow faintly in the east, they started moving. Mark led the way through the narrow back paths, carrying 2 children in his arms. Lyra followed with the others, whispering to keep them calm. The streets were silent, but every sound made them flinch. When they finally reached the shop, Mark opened the basement door and guided them inside. It was dusty and cold, but safe. As the children settled down, Lyra looked around and smiled softly. "This is better than anything we've had in months," she said. Mark nodded, breathing heavily. "You can stay here as long as you need. No one will find you." Lyra turned toward him, her voice shaking. "You've done more than I could ever ask for." "Why, Mark? Why risk yourself for aliens you barely know?" He looked at her with quiet conviction. "Because if I don't, then I'm not human anymore." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, she truly saw him not as a boss, not as a man, but as something rare in the galaxy. Outside, the city woke to another cold day, unaware that deep beneath its steel streets, a human and an alien had made a promise that would defy fear, law, and even the stars themselves. And for Mark, that was enough. The next few days passed in tense silence. Mark worked at the shop during the day, fixing broken machines and pretending everything was normal. But beneath the floor in the old storage vault, a secret world was alive. The alien children whispered softly, playing with bits of wire and tools. Lyra spent her nights keeping them warm, teaching them small words in human language, and fixing whatever broke every night. Mark brought more supplies, food, batteries, water filters, always careful, always watching for patrols. But deep inside he knew the peace wouldn't last. Rumors were spreading faster than ever. Someone had told the guards that food was missing from a nearby warehouse, and they were searching every building in the lower districts. One morning, as Mark opened the shop, he saw a patrol ship hovering nearby. 2 guards were questioning shop owners, scanning faces with their handheld devices. His stomach tightened. He quickly walked inside and locked the door, breathing hard. Down below, Lyra looked up from the hatch. "They're close, aren't they?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Too close," Mark said quietly. "We need to stay calm. If they search here, I'll handle it." Lyra's eyes filled with worry. "Mark, if they find them, they'll arrest you too." He smiled weakly. "Then I'll make sure they don't." That night, the city lights flickered like dying stars. Mark stood by the shop counter, pretending to balance the day's sales. Outside, he heard the heavy steps of soldiers. The metallic clank of boots echoed down the street. He peeked through the window. The patrol unit was sweeping the area, 6 guards armed and alert, their scanners glowing faint blue. They stopped right in front of his shop. Mark's heart pounded. He whispered under his breath, "Stay quiet, everyone. Please stay quiet." The door rattled as someone knocked hard. "Open up, City Patrol!" Mark forced himself to breathe, then unlocked the door and stepped aside. "Evening, officers," he said calmly. "What's going on?" The lead guard, a tall man with a metallic visor, stepped in. "We're conducting inspections. Some citizens have reported suspicious activity in this area, missing supplies, late-night movement. You've been working odd hours, haven't you?" Mark gave a small laugh. "Mechanic hours are never normal, sir. Machines break more at night than during the day." The guard didn't smile. He nodded to his team. "Search the place." Mark's blood turned cold. 2 guards began scanning the room while another headed toward the back. Mark followed quickly, trying to sound casual. "Careful with the equipment, please. Some of it's delicate." Down below in the vault, Lyra gathered the children close. The older ones covered the younger ones' mouths, keeping them quiet. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed above them. Dust fell from the ceiling. The guards' scanners beeped faintly when they passed near the hidden hatch. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He stepped forward quickly. "That's just old wiring under the floor. The signal always confuses sensors." The guard frowned. "Let's check." Mark swallowed hard. He needed to distract them fast. He grabbed an old power coil from the shelf and dropped it. Sparks flew, lighting up the room. The sudden noise made everyone jump. "Damn it!" Mark shouted. "These coils again. They've been malfunctioning all week." The guards turned toward him instantly. "You should be more careful," one said sharply. Mark forced a nervous laugh. "Tell me about it." "I've nearly burned my shop twice this month." The lead officer gave a suspicious look, then finally waved his hand. "We're done here. Keep your papers ready for the next inspection." When the door finally closed behind them, Mark exhaled shakily, feeling his knees weaken. He waited until their steps faded away, then rushed to the back and lifted the hatch. Lyra's pale face looked up at him, eyes wide. "Are they gone?" He nodded. "For now." She climbed out quietly, her hands trembling. "You saved us again," she whispered. Mark leaned against the wall, exhausted. "We were lucky. Too lucky." He looked at her seriously. "We can't stay here anymore. They're getting closer every night." Lyra's voice was heavy with fear. "Where will we go?" Mark hesitated, then said, "There's an old cargo port outside the city, Sector 12. It's abandoned, but still has working tunnels. We can hide there until things calm down." Lyra looked doubtful. "It's too far. The children can't walk that long." "I'll get us a transport," Mark said firmly. "One trip, one night. We'll move when the guards change shifts." Lyra stared at him in disbelief. "You'll be risking everything," he met her gaze. "So will you. But we can't stop now. They deserve a chance to live." Down below, the children stirred, sensing the tension. One little girl tugged at Lyra's sleeve. "Miss Lyra, are we leaving again?" Lyra knelt beside her, brushing her hair gently. "Yes, my star," she said softly. "But this time we're going somewhere safe. Somewhere with light." Mark watched them quietly. For the first time, he truly understood what courage looked like. It wasn't soldiers or weapons. It was a tired alien woman willing to lose everything for a group of lost children. And it was a human man ready to stand beside her even against his own kind. As the night deepened, Mark packed the last of their supplies. Outside, the rain began to fall, washing the dust off the streets. The sound was soft like a promise. Tomorrow they would run. Tomorrow they would face whatever came next. Together. And no matter what happened, Mark knew one thing with certainty. Humanity wasn't a word. It was a choice. The night was darker than usual, covered in low clouds and quiet rain. The city seemed half asleep, unaware that deep below its glowing towers, two figures were preparing to disappear forever. Mark stood near the old transport vehicle behind his shop. It was rusty and loud, but still worked. He had fixed its engine the previous day and loaded it with supplies: water, blankets, food, and a few old fuel cells. Every sound felt too loud, every shadow too deep. He kept glancing at the sky where the patrol drones floated silently like metal birds. Inside the shop, Lyra was waking the children gently. Her voice was soft, warm like the glow of the small lamp beside her. "Wake up, my little stars. It's time to go." The children stirred, rubbing their sleepy eyes. Some of them were too young to understand the danger. They thought it was another move to another dark room. But tonight was different. Tonight, Lyra hoped, would be their last night running. When everyone was ready, she looked at Mark. He nodded once. "Let's move before the shift change." They left through the back door, moving in silence. Rain soaked their clothes, but no one complained. The narrow alleys were slick and cold. Lyra carried the smallest child in her arms, while Mark guided the others with a small light. Every time thunder rolled in the distance, the children flinched. Mark whispered, "It's just the sky talking. Don't be scared." As they reached the vehicle, one of the older boys asked softly, "Are we going home now?" Lyra smiled faintly. "Yes," she said, even though she didn't know where home was anymore. "Yes, we are." Mark helped them climb into the back of the truck, covering them with blankets to stay hidden. Then he climbed into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The old engine coughed, sputtered, then started with a deep rumble. The sound felt like thunder in the quiet street. "Hold on," he whispered. The truck rolled forward slowly, its tires splashing through puddles. Every few meters, Mark looked at the scanner on the dashboard. The red dots, patrol drones, were close, but not close enough. For nearly 20 minutes, they drove through the lower sectors, keeping to the shadows. The rain helped. It blurred the drone cameras and softened the sound. Lyra sat beside him, her hand resting on the child in her lap. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, full of fear and hope mixed together. Then, as they turned a corner near the cargo port, a beam of white light hit them. Sharp, bright, blinding. "Stop the vehicle," a robotic voice ordered through a loudspeaker. Mark's heart pounded. He slammed his foot on the accelerator instead. The truck roared forward, tires screeching. Behind them, sirens wailed and red lights flashed through the rain. Lyra held the children close. "Don't look back," she cried. The truck bounced over uneven ground as Mark drove toward the old port gate. The metal sign above it was half broken, reading only Orion 12. He remembered the back tunnels Lyra had mentioned, narrow, hidden paths that led beyond the city's border. If they could reach them, they might escape. The guards' vehicles closed in. Laser beams cut through the darkness, striking near the truck. Sparks flew. Mark gritted his teeth, turning sharply down a side ramp. "Hold tight!" The truck skidded, crashed through a weak fence, and plunged into a narrow service tunnel. The lights flickered as they sped through, metal walls echoing with every impact. Then suddenly the tunnel opened into a wide chamber, a forgotten loading bay. Mark stopped the truck, breathing hard. "We made it," I think. Lyra looked behind them. The tunnel entrance had collapsed from the impact. They were safe for now. The children slowly peeked out from under the blankets, their faces pale but alive. One of them whispered, "We're safe." Lyra nodded, smiling through tears. "Yes, my stars. You're safe now." Mark leaned back, exhausted, rain dripping from his hair. He looked at her and smiled weakly. "Guess I'm officially a criminal now." She shook her head gently. "No, Mark, you're a hero." He laughed softly. "Heroes don't usually drive rusty trucks." "Maybe," she said, "but heroes save lives." They spent the rest of the night inside the loading bay, lighting a small fire from broken crates. The children huddled around it, warm for the first time in weeks. Lyra sat beside Mark, her eyes reflecting the soft flames. "When the sun rises," she said quietly, "we'll head for the green zones. The old colonies still take refugees. It's far, but we'll make it." Mark looked at her for a long moment. "You'll make it," he said. "I can't go with you," she turned sharply. "What? Why?" "They'll trace the truck. Someone has to stay behind to erase the records, mislead the patrols. If I go missing too, they'll know." Her eyes filled with tears. "You'll be caught," he smiled softly. "Maybe, but it'll buy you time." Lyra's voice broke. "You've already done enough." Mark looked at the children, then back at her. "Not enough," he said quietly. "Not yet." The first light of dawn began to shine through a crack in the ceiling, soft and golden. It touched their faces like a gentle blessing. The rain outside had stopped. For the first time in a long while, the world felt calm. Lyra stood and placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You'll always have a place with us," she whispered. "No matter what happens," Mark nodded, his throat tight. "Take care of them. Tell them humanity still exists somewhere out there." As the sun rose over the ruined port, Lyra led the children through the back tunnels toward freedom. Mark watched until they vanished into the light. Then he turned back toward the city, toward the danger, his heart heavy but proud. Because that morning, in a world divided by species and fear, one human had proven that compassion could still burn brighter than any star. And in that dawn, hope was reborn.